Hello there, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today. Get started with the pensions module for Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined by my colleague Alice, who's standing by in the background, ready and waiting to answer the questions. Let's take a look at what we'll cover in the webinar. So I'm going to start things off with an introduction, giving you a reminder of your auto-enrolment duties and an overview of what's included with the pensions module. We're then going to take a look at the setup process, explaining how to get up and running for either a new company taking on staff for the first time or an existing payroll that wasn't previously using the pensions module. Once we've got it all set up, I'm going to go through a very quick demo of where the pensions module fits into your payroll process. So I'll be looking at the pension assessment and send pension correspondence options briefly, but we do expand on the functionality of the pensions module in some of our other sessions. So we do have sessions available to book onto for pension assessment and also for pensions data exchange, which is a way of submitting pension information to certain providers. So look out for more details on our other webinars towards the end of today's session. And I'll be running through the further support, including those additional webinars, our Help Centre and Sage University, before we have that time at the end for you to look through the questions. So let's get things underway with our introduction. And first thing I'm going to do is to just briefly cover off your duties as an employer under automatic enrolment legislation. Now, this is something that we also covered in our pensions basics session, but it's always worth a reminder, and you can have these duties in mind when I start to show you the types of things that the pension module automates in respect of some of these tasks. Now, there are 4 initial duties, either at your staging date or what's known as your duties start date, which would be when you take on your first employee. And they are to choose a qualifying pension scheme that can be used for automatic enrolment, to work out which of your employees need to be put into that pension scheme, known as a pension assessment, writing to your staff to explain how automatic enrolment affects them, and declaring your compliance by registering with the pensions regulator. And I would say most of you, certainly if you're an existing employer, will have already completed these steps, either at your original staging date, or if you've become an employer since 2017, on your duty start date when you took on your first member of staff. But it doesn't end at that point. There are a series of ongoing duties that you need to do each and every time you process payroll for most of these. And they include to assess your employees' age and earnings each time they're paid to see if there's anyone that's not in a pension scheme that needs to be put in. So employees might become the right age to be enrolled. They might start earning above the earnings trigger. And at that point, they need to be auto-enrolled into a scheme. You'll need to maintain contributions into the pension scheme, recording employee and employer contributions and ensuring they're above the legal minimum. You're responsible for managing requests to join or leave the scheme, known as opting in or opting out. You'll need to keep records of how you've complied with these duties. And then every 3 years, you have a duty to re-enroll employees who have previously opted out or left your pension scheme. And we do cover re-enrollment in one of our other pensions webinars. So again, look out for more details towards the end of the session. Now, you can read more about the ongoing duties from the pensions regulator following the link on the slide. But what we aim to show you in our webinars around the pensions module is how this can help you to manage these duties, automate many of them, and to take the stress away from doing everything manually. And this is where the pensions module comes in. So it's an additional module that you can subscribe to as part of your Sage 50 payroll subscription. It's designed to eliminate the admin burden of automatic enrolment. And there are 3 main features of the module, which are the pension assessment option, something that you'll be running each time you process your payroll. There are ways to facilitate sending pension data to your provider. The way you do this will depend on the specific provider you use, but I'll talk more about what's available to you as a pensions module subscriber. And sending pension correspondence deals with all of the letters that you are legally obliged to send or to ensure your employees receive at various points in the auto-enrolment cycle. Now, I have linked to our full pensions module guide on this part of the handout, and we are going to focus mainly on the setup in today's session. But as I say, we do go into more detail on pension assessment, sending pension data in some of our other sessions. Now, at this stage, you might be wondering whether or not you have the pensions module. Might be something that you have and you don't use. Maybe it's already set up, maybe it isn't. So just to explain, an easy way for you to check if you have the pensions module as part of your software license is to attempt to open the pension assessment option. So this is one of the tasks within the payroll tasks. It usually comes after entering the payments. And if you click on pension assessment and you see this first screenshot, the one asking you to take a backup, that confirms that you do have the pensions module. And from that point, it will either take you straight into the pension assessment, or if you've never set it up, it'll take you into the setup wizard. Or if you see the image on the right asking you to subscribe to the pensions module, that means your current license doesn't include it. And you can get in touch with our team if you were interested in adding that on to your subscription. And you can read more about this following the link again on the handout. So you're going to see some of these features in action once we've run through the setup process, but we're going to give you demos of setting up to start with. And the first scenario I'm going to run you through is setting up the pensions module for a new company. So this is a company that has just taken on their first member of staff, or it would be a similar process if perhaps you are transferring to a new PAYE scheme. So employees are being transferred from one company to another, and you need to set up the auto-enrollment duties for that new PAYE scheme. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through some demos first, and then we've got some slides to recap what you've just seen. And obviously you can download the slides for a bit of a takeaway, so you've got that resource to make your notes or to read the further links. So what I will do at this point is just bring the slides down as we launch into our first demo. And this is a brand new company that I've set up. I've taken on 5 employees, and they all started on the same date, the 1st of June in this example. And one of the things that's key to understand with the pensions module is if you're using the module to manage your pensions duties, you should not be doing any manual pension assignments. So you shouldn't be going into the employee record to add pension schemes or remove them, as these processes all become automated mainly through the pension assessment option. So to set the scene here, I've created my new employee records, but if I take you into the employee record and click on the pensions tab, you'll see that there are no pension schemes set, because we're going to get the module to do all of this when we assess them for the first time. I have got my pension scheme set up. So from company and pension schemes, I'm just using the one scheme for this new company that I've created. And as I took on my employees on the 1st of June, that was the start date for my first employee, that is my duties start date. And before setting up the pensions module, I've just gone ahead and I've set my process date to that same date as well. Now to complete the setup, you would go to your company tasks here in the bottom left corner, and then you would find the option for pensions module settings. And you'll see as soon as I click on this, I'm being told that this will amend pension and auto-enrollment information. And before continuing, we do recommend that you take a backup of your data. So it is crucial to take a backup at this point, because if something goes wrong with the setup and you want to start again, you would then have a point to restore back to. So I would always strongly recommend clicking yes to this message, running through the backup wizard, and then making sure you know where you saved your file to and what it was called. So I'm going to call this pensions module setup. I've saved that into my usual payroll backups folder. So this is the first screen of the setup wizard where you will need to enter your duties start date. So for a payroll taking on their first member of staff, it's the date that that employee started. So officially for my new company, that was the 1st of June. That's what I've entered as my duty start date. I would then click onto the start option, and it will ask me if I would like to set up pensions data exchange, which is a way of sending pension information directly to any of these pension providers, so Nest, Smart Pensions, or the people's pension. Now, this is something that we're going to cover in a separate webinar. So I'm going to go with no for now, and that can be set up later from the pensions module settings. And when I click on to continue, we then have 2 stages to complete: setting up the payroll software, as you can see at the top here, and then informing the employees. Now, for this first section, set up your payroll software, I've got 3 steps to complete. If you've set up additional payroll users, you will have an extra step at the start, which will allow you to grant access for your additional users to the pensions module settings. But I only have 1 user in payroll, so I don't have that option. And I'm going to go straight ahead to configuring our pension scheme, which is where we're going to define our default automatic enrolment qualifying pension scheme. So for each of these steps, you will need to click the Do It Now button. The first one will list all of the pension schemes that are set up. And if I just maximize this screen, you can see any employees that are assigned. So I have no employees assigned to my scheme because we're going to get the pensions module to do all of that. It is marked as a qualifying scheme though, and it's a scheme that uses qualifying earnings. And if I hadn't already, I could enter my provider reference in the box just here. Now, this is going to be my default scheme for auto enrollment, but if you do have more than 1 scheme, you are able to set up exceptions for different groups of employees if you want them to be enrolled into different schemes depending on maybe their pay frequency or which department they're in. So I've got this set as my default. I'm going to click on to save, and I can then tick to complete that first step. Step 2 is configuring pay elements. So this just gives you a chance to set up which payments count as qualifying earnings. So qualifying earnings does have a definition under workplace pensions law, and essentially it's most payments that are subject to tax and national insurance are qualifying. So it would include overtime payments and bonuses, but in this case I have an expenses payment that's non-taxable, just for reimbursing expenses, so that would not form part of qualifying earnings. And it's these earnings that are going to be used in the assessment of your staff to see whether they need to be enrolled into a pension scheme. So it gives you the chance to check your settings to make sure you flagged all qualifying earnings as such. So I'm happy with those settings. I would click on to save. I can then tick the box to mark that second step complete. The third option is to identify any non-UK workers. So these are employees that don't ordinarily work within the UK. So if you do have any non-UK workers, auto enrolment doesn't apply to them, and you can exclude them by ticking the non-UK worker box. But actually that's not applicable to any of my employees. So having reviewed this page, I can click on to save, and I'm then able to mark that third step as complete. So once you've done these steps, you can then move on by clicking next. And as a new employer, taking on your first employees, there is a suggestion that you send an introduction letter. Now, you actually do this from the reports option these days. If you click Do It Now, it will take you into our online help center where you can read more about the pensions module. But if you do want to send the introduction letter, all you need to do is to tick this box to mark this step as done, and then you'll be able to send it from your reports option. So I've done that. I'm going to click on to next. It says that we're all done. We're now set up for auto enrolment. And when I click finish, the next time I go into my pensions module settings, I don't have to complete that startup wizard. And it's now taken me into the settings, confirming my duty start date, my default scheme, and also giving some other options that I'm going to run through a little bit later on. Now, if you did want to send a letter introducing auto enrolment to staff of a new company, you can do so by selecting the relevant employees and going to the reports icon at the top of the screen here. And if you have a look in the employee folder, it's right near the top, it's the automatic enrolment employee introduction letter. And that can be ran from here. If you set your employees up for email documents, it could also be emailed. And it just explains a bit more about the legislation and how that's going to affect them with this new company that we've set up. So entirely optional, you don't need to send it. It was kind of designed back in the days when people had staging dates and the legislation went live from that date. But these days, the rules apply immediately when you take on your first member of staff. So that's set up for a new company. Useful to note the steps. I appreciate many of you will already be an existing company, but just to recap what we've been through there. Step number 1 was to confirm your duty start date. So for a new company, it's the date you took on your first employee. Second step was setting up the payroll software. So this is defining the default auto-enrollment pension scheme. This is the scheme that the module will put eligible staff into. You then configure your pay elements. You check any non-UK workers if you have them. And the third step, informing your employees. It's optional, just tick the box. And if you do want to run the letter, it's available within the employee folder in reports. And that company is now set up to do a pension assessment. And the first time you assess your staff, if they meet the criteria to be put into a pension scheme, that's when they will be auto-enrolled. And you'll see a bit how that works later on in the demos. Now, the other setup option is for existing companies. So the example I'm going to be using is I have a company that was established back in April 2023, took on its first member of staff on the 1st of April 2023, but we've been processing manually. We've been assigning the pension schemes manually. We've been using TPR's letter templates, and we've been kind of entering details manually on the provider portal. And we've decided that we're going to start using the pensions module as the company is expanding, just to make our life a bit easier and to help us comply with those ongoing duties. So the setup for an existing company will take a little longer. You will need to know certain information about your existing employees, and that would include the dates that people have been enrolled into the pension scheme historically, details of anyone that opted out and when they opted out. And the idea behind the startup for an existing company is you will be providing the information for what has happened historically, and then moving forward, the pensions module will take over and it will deal with those duties for you. So again, I'm going to take you through a demo first, and then I will come back and recap these steps. So for this one, I'm going to switch to a different company. This is an existing payroll, and because I've been doing it manually, many of my employees do have the pension scheme assigned to them. So I've been making deductions of their pension. I've just been dealing with the auto-enrollment stuff manually, and I'm going to start using the pensions module, having taken out that subscription. So I'm going to start doing it from my June process date. And to get the startup all complete, just as before, I would go to the company tasks. I would go into my pensions module settings. Again, we've got the prompt to take a backup. Now, I took a backup already of this data, so I'm going to skip it for now. And then it starts off in very much the same way as it does for a new company. Now, in this first step, we do need to enter our original duty start date. So this could be your staging date if you're an established company and you existed before 2017, or it might be a more recent duty start date when you took on your first employee. And in my case, it is very recent. Well, it's within the last year or so. It's the 1st of April 2023 was my original duty start date. And if you're not sure what it is, if you follow this link, it'll take you to the pension regulator website, and it will explain how you can confirm that date. Now, on the next step, it identifies that this date is in the past, and it's asking you what you've done so far. Now, in this case, I assess my employees manually using another system. So I did it manually. I maybe used reports. It wasn't that I didn't assess my employees, so I have been complying with the duties. I just haven't been using the pensions module. So this is the option you would choose if you've been doing it any other way before now. It's then going to give you a box to accept that it's your responsibility to provide accurate information during this process, so that the pensions module can then take over with automating some of your duties. So we're going to tick the box to say we're happy to continue. We're going to do the pensions data exchange in another session, so we'll do that another day. And then you can see the same steps as we saw before, where we're going to choose our default qualifying scheme, configure the pay elements, and flag any non-UK workers. So you've already seen these steps. I'm going to quickly complete them now. So the difference here is I do have employees assigned to one of my schemes, and this is the one I'm going to use as my default scheme. But I do happen to have another qualifying scheme, which I could use for some of my employees. I've got 3 qualifying earnings pay elements, so basic, overtime, and bonus. I'm happy with those settings. And again, for this company, I do not have any non-UK workers. So I've reviewed those and I've completed those 3 steps. Now that then takes you onto the step where we need to tell more about the employees and their history. And this is the section that's kind of the most complicated in the setup. This will take you some time, and it is important that you do have the information to hand when you come to do this. So I'm going to click Do It Now, and it does warn you that what you're about to do can't be undone without restoring a backup of your data. So make sure you did take that initial backup, or cancel out at this point, take a backup and then come back in. And it starts by asking us about employees that have no automatic enrolment pension history detected. So these are employees without a pension scheme assigned, and it wants to know what status applies to each of these employees. And it can be one of 3. They've either previously opted out or left a pension. They might currently be postponed, which is likely to be someone that only recently became eligible and you've applied a period of up to 3 months of postponement, or it could be neither. It's probably that they just don't meet the criteria to be auto-enrolled. Now, in my case, I know that employee 2 opted out. I've checked my records and I know that's why they have no pension history. But for the rest of them, these employees here, I'm going to select all of them. They haven't opted out or left. They're not postponed. So I'm going to click neither. And basically, I've determined that they are not eligible to go into a pension scheme, and that's why they have no pension history. So I've got 1 opted out. I've got 4 where neither of those options apply. I can then move on to the next step. So the next step asks about employees that do have an active qualifying pension scheme, and it's asking you what were the circumstances that made them join this scheme. So they might have auto-enrolled, they might have asked to opt in, they might have joined it, or it could be a contractual enrolment. So I've reviewed all of these employees, and actually I know that they were all auto-enrolled. So I've selected them all. I've selected auto-enrolled, and it's recorded the active membership date as the same date that they joined. And then on this 3rd step, it's asking me about employees who have left a pension scheme. So they either have a pension scheme that has a leave date in it, or we've indicated that they opted out or left. So for this one, we need to say what scheme they were in originally. So they were in my Nest pension. They were put in on the original duty start date, but they opted out. I should put the right date in there. So this is why you're going to need the information to hand. And the next employee as well opted out of the pension. So they were auto-enrolled, they've opted out. They will need to go back in at some point when you do your re-enrollment, but for now, that is their status. And then if you did mention that anyone was postponed, it's going to ask you whether they were postponed at the point they become eligible, or whether they were part of a company-wide postponement when your duties first started. Not relevant in this particular scenario. So it then gives a summary of the information that we've provided. So you can look through this, check you're happy with the dates, etc. You can even, you can print it. Once you've saved this information, you can print a copy of what this screen says. And then when you click on to finish, that's the step complete. And that fills in the blanks. That tells Payroll what has happened historically before you've started using the pensions module. Final step is to catch up on any letters that might need to be sent. Now, really, of recording the fact that letters were sent at the time. So it's just to fill in the blanks in your record keeping. You won't need to actually send these letters out again. So when you click do it now to go into send pension correspondence, it's identified there are 4 employees that would have received a job holder letter to say they've been automatically enrolled. And what we can do is we can select these letters and record the date they were originally sent. We can say who sent the letters. So I'm going to say that we sent them as a user. And once you've populated these columns, rather than actually print them out again, you can show them as sent. And by doing this, the pensions module has a record that these letters were sent back at the point they needed to be. So that's the final step of the setup complete. You'd click onto next. It gives you a link to our online help center if you want to read more about this. And when I click onto finish, that's it done. I can now go into my pensions module settings and I can review the settings that were entered. So I've got my duties start date. I've got the default auto enrollment scheme. Now, if you do have groups of employees that you would prefer to auto enroll into different pension schemes to the default, you can assign either a department or cost center to that group of employees, and you can add an exception. So just as an example, I group my employees by department, and I can add an exception to my directors department. And I could choose the directors pension scheme as being the one that I want directors to be auto-enrolled into if they're not already in a scheme. So if you do need to use different schemes for different employees, you can set up corresponding departments or cost centers, and then the exceptions can be added here. So I'm just going to go ahead and save these settings. And if we take a look at just one of these employees and go on to the pensions tab, you can see that this information is now populated based on what was entered in the startup wizard. So it's got the current status for the employee. It knows when they were originally auto-enrolled and the fact that that's how they went into the pension scheme. And it means we can now start doing pension assessments. And rather than treat them as an employee being auto-enrolled for the first time, it knows that was historical and it can deal with them in the appropriate way. So that's set up for an existing company. Just to recap those steps, you do start by confirming your duty start date. So that's the original staging or duty start date. It'll ask you what you've done so far. So you would choose the option that you assessed your employees manually. You then set up the payroll software, choosing your default auto-enrollment pension scheme, checking your qualifying earnings are set up correctly, and flagging any non-UK workers. And then the big step here is tell us more about your employees. So it'll group them to those with no pension history. So you need to say whether they opted out, they were postponed, or neither. It'll then look at those that do have a pension scheme assigned, and you tell them when they joined and how they joined. And then it'll ask you about those that have left a pension scheme, so whether they opted out after being auto-enrolled and what date they did that. And this just means that next time the re-enrollment comes round, which is every 3 years, they can then be put back into the scheme at that point rather than going back in immediately. And that final step was catching up on the letters. So we're able to show those letters as sent. There are also some general notices that you can treat in the same way. They're historical letters, and we'll deal with those when we do the next demo. Quick look at the settings then. Once you've been through the startup wizard, your settings will confirm your staging or duty start date. It'll also show you the default auto-enrollment pension that you chose. So that's the pension that will be assigned to employees if they meet the criteria in the pension assessment for the first time. There is an option of choosing different default schemes for employees assigned to specific departments or cost centers. There are options to choose default postponement periods. So postponement is something that we'll cover in the pension assessment webinar, but it allows you to set a default kind of postponement date. And then there are some re-enrollment settings. Again, that's something that you'll see if you come along to our re-enrollment webinar. So now that everything's set up, I do want to give you a bit of a sneak peek at the pensions module in action. I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail because we are running other sessions, which will explain, give you a deep dive into the pension assessment and also the pensions data exchange option when it comes to sending pension data. But I have included some resources in the handout for you. So if you want to read more about any of these options, do make sure you download a copy. So which options are specific to the pensions module? Well, I've laid them out on this slide. So they're all within the payroll tasks, with the exception of the settings, which you'll find on the company tasks. And the ones that I've highlighted there are options that you would run if you have the pensions module. Now, importing pension updates is part of pensions data exchange, so that won't apply to everyone. It really does depend on your pension provider and whether you've set up and you're using that option. There's the pension assessment, so that's the other pre-update task, and you run it straight after enter payments. This is what deals with enrolling employees if they meet the criteria. And then your post-update tasks, so once you've updated records and sent your full payment submission, is all to do with communicating with your pension provider by sending them the relevant data, reviewing the payments you need to make to your pension provider, and dealing with any correspondence that needs to be sent to your employees. So I've highlighted the areas on the payroll tasks and also the process map for any process map users out there that you would have access to if you have the pensions module. So quick 5-minute demo on some of these options. I'm going to stick with the existing company that I've just set up. So my next pay date for that company will be the 30th of June. I have actually taken on a new starter this month. And one of the key things to understand is when you're using the pensions module, treat the pensions tab as read-only. So don't go into these options and start adding the pension scheme yourself, because that will then cause things like pension data not to be created and pension letters not to be generated. So this tab will take care of itself whenever you run a pension assessment. And this new employee that I've just taken on doesn't have a pension scheme assigned because we're going to assess them on their first pay date. So we've got everyone selected. If I was using Pensions Data Exchange, I could check for any updates to my pension scheme or employees that have opted out. I'm going to skip past that, and we would then go through and we would enter our employees' payments. So this is the wage that will be assessed to determine if it's above the earnings trigger. And once you've done the enter payments, your next step is pension assessment. So I'm going to go into that now. You will see this message the very first time you use the pensions module. So it's just done a check to make sure that your pension schemes are at least at the minimum levels required, which they are. And then you'll be asked to take a backup. So a good habit to get into is to take a backup before each pension assessment. I'm going to call it PA, for pension assessment. And then you do have that point to restore back to should you need it. So this is the assessment screen. You're looking out for flags. And because we've just ran the setup, we are actually seeing a lot of flags this period because it thinks that people have been automatically enrolled. But this is historically, they were auto-enrolled. So in this very first assessment, you'll see the flags. Moving forward, the flag will indicate genuine new changes. For example, to employee 10, they're a new starter, they've been automatically enrolled. So this will do the enrollment for you. It'll set the enrollment date, which happens to be the employee's start date. There are other options at the top that we'll go into in our pension assessment session. And once you've completed your assessment, you would close out of this screen. And what I can see straight away for employee 10 is they now have a pension scheme assigned to them. It's set their enrollment date, tells me they're in the opt-out period, so we can manage opt-out requests and refunds if we need to. And behind the scenes, it's now able to prepare pension data and pension correspondence for our provider. So you would then run your payslips and reports in the usual way. You would update the records. And I'm getting a reminder telling me I should do a pension assessment first, which I've done. And once you've updated the record and sent your full payment submission, you've got then these 3 tasks. So a reminder to send your pension data to your provider. And there are different ways of doing that, which I will run through in a moment. There's a report you can run showing the pension payments that are due. So you could run this over a date range. If you make your payments monthly to your provider, you could run it for the month, for example. So that just generates a report. You put your report criteria in. Say it was the month of June. And then the report would be printed out for you. And then the final step is your pension correspondence. So we saw this as part of the Startup Wizard, but if we go into it now, it does come up with historical general notices. So this is stuff that would have been sent in the past. So I'm going to deal with those first. I'm going to treat these as already sent. And we can put the relevant date in if we want to record the actual date it was sent. So for these first ones, it's back on the staging date. I'm going to show them as sent. And then for the others, these were all taken on conveniently on the same date, which is useful from my point of view. Again, we would show these ones as sent, but then we do have some live letters. So once you're up and running, Send Pension Correspondence will show you anything new, letters to be sent. So there is a general notice that we send to any new starter, informing them about auto-enrollment legislation. And there is a job holder letter to tell them they've been auto-enrolled into the scheme. It tells me the due date for these letters. And when I'm ready to produce them, I select them. I record the sent on date. So these are going on pay date. I can record that we are producing the letters, or if your provider does it on your behalf, you can choose provider and show as sent. But if you want to actually print them, which I do, I would click on to send. And that would then give me the prompt to go ahead and print both of those letters. And by doing this, you have an audit trail of letters and when they were sent. So because I've recorded the dates that the original letters were sent, I can sort of filter by date. I can see the most recent ones here were for my new starter. And I'll be able to send their enrollment details to my provider. So that's just to illustrate where the pensions module fits in and around your current payroll process. I'm going to very quickly go through the rest of the slides. These are available in your handout. So pension assessment is all around identifying eligible staff and assigning the pension scheme. Also used for processing opt-in, opt-outs and refunds, as well as postponing employees where required. And we go into that in much more detail in our pension assessment webinar. So get yourself signed up for that one. Sending pension data, 3 different options available to you depending on your provider. You could use Pensions Data Exchange, which is a direct link between payroll and your pension provider, similar to submitting to HMRC, but you're submitting information to the provider. Contributions and enrollments, with some of them you can import information, and it's compatible with Nest, the People's Pension and Smart Pension. There's an alternative Send Pension Data option where you can create CSV files, and you can track which of those you've uploaded to your pension provider and mark them as confirmed or rejected. So that's compatible with Nest, Now Pensions or the People's Pension. And for all other providers, as part of the pensions module, you get access to bespoke reports that can be used to create CSV files that you can upload to your provider's portal. So exclusive to our pensions module subscribers, you get access to that library of reports. You can download the ones that you need. Finally, you saw this briefly in the demo. Sending pension correspondence allows you to track communications with your employees, keeps track of due dates. You record when they were sent and who sent the letter. And that gives you that full audit trail of the information. And just to tie these back to your ongoing employer duties before we wrap up. So first duty is to assess your employees' age and earnings to see if they need to be put into a pension scheme. And that is exactly what the pension assessment is designed for. You need to continue paying into your pension scheme. So we facilitate that by calculating and deducting the contributions, giving you the reports that you can run, and ways of sending pension data to your provider. Managing requests to join or leave the scheme is all done via the pension assessment. And we'll be taking you through that in more detail in our other webinar. It's all about record keeping. So the pensions tab will give an audit trail of the auto enrollment statuses. You can see all of the letters that have been sent historically as well. And it has enrollment functionality built in as well. So re-enrollment duties are every 3 years, where you have to put people back into your scheme if they previously left. So you'll be able to manage your re-enrollment date. It'll do the re-enrollment in your payroll for you. And again, it will facilitate sending information to your provider and generating the relevant letters. So that's the end of the demos. I would like to mention the further support that's available, and we'll keep the webinar open a little longer just to try and get through your questions in the chat. But first of all, I'd like to mention some of the upcoming webinars. So if you missed Pensions the Basics, there's now a recording available, which you can access from our webinar hub, sage.co.uk/webinars. This one was Get Started with the Pensions module, but other pensions module topics include pension assessment and pensions data exchange. We've got a practical session all around pension calculations on 20th and 28th of June, and we cover re-enrollment towards the end of this month as well. So if you're interested in any of those sessions, if you want to learn more, you can get yourself signed up. You'll find all the details on our website. Our online help centre is a fantastic resource for all things payroll. We do have a hub dedicated to workplace pensions, and from within there, you'll find our full pensions module guide. You can also search our knowledge base. You can watch you've got a link to our webinars at the top of the help centre. And if you need to get in touch with the support team, you can find all of their contact details here as well. And a fantastic online learning resource is Sage University at sageu.com, where we have a range of e-learning courses, online certification and bite-sized learning, including modules around the pensions module. So you can get stuck into that. It's completely free to sign up and create your profile, and the Sage 50 Payroll learning path is available to you. So like I say, we are going to focus on answering the questions in the Q&A, which we'll continue to do in the chat. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for attending today, and I hope you found the session insightful, and it's given you that insight into setting up the pensions module. Even if it's already been done, you never know when you might need to do this again in the future. So let us know what you thought in the survey when you exit the webinar today. It's the first time we've ran this specific session, so we're always looking for ways to improve, and that really does help us to keep these sessions relevant to you. And also look out for a follow-up email arriving later on today, which will contain a link to the recording of this session, as well as a link to sign up for future webinars. But I'm going to go on to mute for now, just to help out with the questions. We'll keep the session open a little while longer, just to try and get through as many as we can. And I will come back when we're ready to wrap things up. So I'll speak to you soon. Hi again, everybody, and thank you for sticking with us and for sending all of those questions through. You've certainly kept Alice busy, and I hope that the answers have been useful to you. If we didn't quite get around to your question, apologies for that. You may find the answer that you're looking for in our help centre. If not, I would recommend that you reach out to our support team, who will be more than happy to advise you. You can find all their contact details again on our help centre at sage.co.uk/help. As we are now out of time, we're going to wrap the session up. So once again, thanks for your company this afternoon. We do very much look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars. It's all on a pensions theme this month. So do get yourself signed up to some of the other dates. With that said, on behalf of myself and Alice, thanks again for joining us, and we will see you on the next one. Goodbye.